Tonight, history whispers instead of shouts, and a river older than memory invites you to slow your breathing, lower your guard, and listen to what still survives in darkness here. Before you drift any deeper, if this quiet helps you feel safe tonight, you're welcome to stay with us. Subscribing softly keeps this place gentle and lets these nights continue. Now, rest. The night arrives quietly in Egypt around the year 300 AD, without ceremony and without apology, as though even darkness understands that this land has seen enough spectacle already. There is no dramatic curtain of shadow, no sudden silence falling from the sky. Instead, the sun simply withdraws, slowly and without protest, as if it has grown tired of watching the same ancient story repeat itself again and again. Heat lingers in the air like a memory that refuses to fade, clinging stubbornly to mud brick walls and to the skin of those who remain awake a little longer than they should. Along the Nile, shadows stretch and soften, turning sharp outlines into vague suggestions, blurring certainty into something more forgiving. This is not the Egypt of blazing temples and crowded markets, not the Egypt that history books like to shout about. This is Egypt after hours, when voices lower, movements slow, and even time itself seems willing to listen. If you pay attention, if you allow the quiet to settle around you, you can almost hear the land exhale, slow and measured, as though the entire civilization has agreed, just for a few fragile hours, to rest its bones. The Nile lies there wide and dark, pretending to sleep. Its surface reflects broken pieces of starlight, trembling gently with each subtle movement beneath. It looks peaceful, almost harmless, but that calm is a well-rehearsed illusion. The river never truly sleeps. It shifts, it pulls, it remembers. Water slides against the banks with a soft, repetitive sound, not loud enough to demand attention, but persistent enough to be impossible to ignore. Somewhere near the reeds, insects begin their nightly ritual, clicking and humming as if they have important business to discuss. Frogs answer from the shallows. Farther away, beyond the palms and the fields, a human voice rises briefly in prayer, then dissolves into the night. No one is trying to be heard. They are simply reminding the darkness that they exist. By day, this land is all structure and certainty. Columns rise, gods are named. Schedules are kept by the movement of the sun. By night, certainty loosens its grip. Temples become silhouettes, their carvings swallowed by shadow. Statues that looked noble in daylight now appear watchful, perhaps even judgmental. The same streets that buzz with trade and argument during the day become slow, cautious paths after sunset. People walk differently at night, more quietly, more carefully, as if the ground itself might be listening. It is a strange contradiction, a civilization so confident in its order, yet so vulnerable once the light fades. Egypt builds for eternity, but every night it must still pass through darkness, like everyone else. Inside the houses along the river, lamps flicker weakly, their flames small and disciplined. Families settle down, not because they are finished living, but because tomorrow demands preparation. Children fall asleep first, untroubled by philosophy or empire. Adults lie awake longer, staring into the dark, thinking about water levels, harvests, taxes, sickness, and the thin line between stability and disaster. Outside, the Nile continues its quiet conversation with the shore. It has fed them, punished them, enriched them, and terrified them for generations. Tonight, it does none of those things. Tonight it simply exists, which somehow feels more unsettling. A river that does nothing is a river that is thinking. There is something deeply ironic about the way ancient Egyptians faced the night. They are famous for their obsession with death, with what comes after, with preserving the body and guiding the soul. Yet here they are, wrapped in blankets, swatting insects, worrying about very practical problems. They believe firmly in life after death, but first, inconveniently, they must survive this one. The afterlife may be eternal, but tomorrow morning still requires food, labor, and cooperation from a river that answers to no one. It is hard to contemplate eternity when your roof leaks and the night air is cold. Even the most devoted believer occasionally prioritizes sleep. As the hours deepen, the night grows heavier, thicker, as if it has weight. The sounds thin out, leaving more space between them. The Nile remains patient and indifferent, flowing as it always has, flowing as it always will. Empires may argue over this land, gods may change their names, and prayers may shift direction, but the river does not care. It has seen all of this before, and it will see what comes next. For now, Egypt breathes slowly beside it, caught between the memory of the day and the uncertainty of dawn. This is the moment before history stirs again, when nothing dramatic happens, and yet everything feels possible. The river that feeds everything and quietly takes everything away. The Nile does not announce its importance, and it never has. It does not rush, it does not roar, and it does not demand admiration. It simply flows, steady and inevitable, like time pretending to be water. In Egypt around the year 300 AD, everyone understands this, without needing to say it out loud. The river is not just part of the landscape, it is the bloodstream of the country, carrying life from the south to the north, with a patience that borders on indifference. To live here is to live on borrowed certainty, because every breath, every meal, every plan for the future is quietly signed by the Nile first. You can argue with neighbors, officials, or even gods, but the river does not negotiate. If Egypt were a body, the Nile would be its pulse. It sets the rhythm of the year more reliably than any calendar carved into stone. The seasons do not arrive because someone declares them. They arrive because the river rises or falls. People do not ask what month it is. They ask what the water is doing. Is it climbing the banks? Is it retreating? Is it behaving the way it should? Or is it thinking about something else entirely? The answers to these questions determine whether there will be grain in storage, bread on the table, and children alive to see another flood. In this way, the Nile becomes time itself, marking the years not by numbers but by survival. Flooding is the river's most dramatic language and also its most misunderstood gift. When the Nile swells and spills into the fields, it brings dark, rich silt that turns dry land into promise. Officially, this is a blessing from the gods, a sacred event celebrated in rituals and prayers. Unofficially, it is a reminder that blessings do not come with instructions. The flood arrives when it arrives, as high as it chooses, caring little for human expectations. Too small, and the land starves. Too large, and homes disappear. The same water that gives life can casually erase it, and the river never explains which mood it is in this year. Farmers understand this better than anyone else because their lives are written directly into the soil. They wake before dawn, they work until their bodies protest, and they watch the river with a focus that borders on devotion. Their tools are simple, their routines repetitive, but their dependence is absolute. A good flood means abundance, stability, perhaps even a little celebration. A bad one means hunger, debt, and quiet desperation. There is a dark humor among them, a saying passed in murmurs rather than laughter. If the Nile is happy, all of Egypt eats. If the Nile is unhappy, all of Egypt remembers what hunger feels like. It is funny in the way that truth often is, sharp enough to hurt if you think about it too long. At night, this relationship with the river becomes more personal, almost intimate. During the day, the Nile is observed, measured, discussed. At night, it is contemplated. People sit near its banks, not necessarily looking at it, but feeling its presence in the dark. The water reflects no answers, only shadows. In these moments, the river stops being a tool and becomes something closer to fate. You cannot argue with fate, you cannot hurry it, and you certainly cannot escape it. You can only live alongside it, hoping it remains generous. This realization settles heavily in the quiet hours, when there is nothing left to distract the mind. The Nile's authority extends beyond food and labor. It shapes belief, politics, and even morality. A good flood is seen as proof that the cosmic order remains intact. A bad one raises uncomfortable questions. Have the gods been offended? Has someone broken the balance? Or, more troubling still, is this simply how the world works, without moral explanation? Official religion prefers the first answer because it allows for solutions, more offerings, more prayers, more obedience. The river itself offers no commentary. It flows the same way, whether temples are full or empty, whether prayers are whispered or forgotten. In its silence, it suggests something unsettling, that nature does not share human concerns about justice. For those who work the land, this silence is familiar and exhausting. Their lives are built on cycles they did not choose and cannot escape. Plant, wait, harvest, wait again. Flood, retreat, repeat. Generations follow one another into the same fields, making the same calculations, telling the same stories. Progress exists, but it is slow and subtle, easily overshadowed by a single bad year. At night, lying awake with sore muscles and anxious thoughts, farmers measure time not by ambition, but by endurance. How long can this continue? How long before the river decides differently? There is a strange comfort hidden inside this dependence, though it rarely feels like comfort while you are living it. The river's rules are harsh, but they are consistent. The Nile does not surprise anyone with novelty. It surprises them with variation. Everyone knows what matters and everyone knows what they cannot control. In a world filled with empires, rising and falling, rulers issuing commands, and gods competing for loyalty, the river remains the most honest authority. It does not pretend to care about individuals, and that honesty, in its own way, feels reliable. As the night deepens, the river seems to absorb more than just starlight. It absorbs worries, prayers, and unspoken fears. People look at it and see their own lives reflected back, not clearly, but truthfully. They see effort without guarantee, faith without certainty, and survival balanced on conditions that might change without warning. This is why the Nile inspires both reverence and resentment. It gives everything and it takes everything, but it never asks for permission to do either. To live beside it is to accept that control is mostly an illusion, one that daylight makes easier to believe. In the calm darkness, Egypt feels suspended, as if held gently but firmly in the river's grasp. Tomorrow the water will still be there, moving south to north, indifferent to names, borders, and beliefs. People will wake, work, pray, and hope, just as they always have. For now, they watch the Nile like one watches a sleeping giant, grateful for its generosity, fearful of its moods, and quietly aware that their entire world flows at its pace, not their own. Houses that are sleeping, and the people who dare not sleep. Along the banks of the Nile, the houses settle into the night like tired animals folding their limbs beneath them. They are built low and practical, shaped by generations who learned quickly not to argue with the climate. Walls of mud brick hold the memory of the sun long after it has disappeared, releasing heat slowly into the darkness. During the day, these homes trap warmth, like an unwanted guest. At night, the heat escapes, leaving behind a coolness that creeps into bones and joints. Roofs are flat, ceilings low, and spaces shared out of necessity rather than choice. These houses are not designed to impress history. They are designed to survive it. Inside, life contracts inward. Lamps burn low, casting shadows that stretch and bend across familiar walls. Families gather not for conversation, but for closeness, the simple reassurance that everyone has made it through another day. Children surrender to sleep easily, their bodies still light enough to trust tomorrow without question. They breathe deeply, unaware of rivers, taxes, or gods. For them, the world is small and kind, contained within the rhythm of meals and stories. Adults watch them with a mixture of affection and envy. Sleep, once so easy, has become a complicated thing. The grown-ups lie awake longer, staring into darkness that feels heavier than it should. Their minds drift, uninvited, toward inventories and calculations. How much grain is left? Will it last until the next harvest? Has the water level been kind enough this year? Somewhere in the house, a cough sounds too persistent, too sharp to ignore. Illness is always nearby, waiting patiently for bodies that are already tired. These are not dramatic fears, but they are relentless. They arrive night after night, sitting quietly beside the bed, refusing to be dismissed. There is a particular irony in how little these people know about the wider world. Beyond Egypt, the Roman Empire is changing, weakening, reshaping itself in ways that future historians will debate endlessly. Here, none of that matters very much. Empires feel distant when you are counting sacks of grain by lamplight. A new emperor does not refill an empty storage jar. A theological argument does not heal a fever. People along the Nile may not know that Rome is in decline, but they know exactly how much rice sits in the corner and how quickly it disappears. History moves loudly elsewhere, but here it whispers through practical concerns. The houses themselves listen to these worries. They have heard them before, passed down with the bricks and beams. Each generation adds its own version, slightly adjusted for new rulers or new taxes, but fundamentally the same. The walls absorb whispered conversations about debts and obligations, about officials who will come asking questions no one wants to answer. Taxes are a constant presence, as predictable and unwelcome as the heat. They are calculated carefully because mistakes cost more than pride. Even at night, numbers hover in the air, invisible but persistent. Sleep, when it comes, is light and easily broken. A noise outside, a shift in the wind, the sound of water moving differently than expected, and eyes open again. The Nile does not need to enter the house to make itself felt. Its influence travels through thought alone. People imagine worst-case scenarios because imagination is cheaper than surprise. If the flood fails, if sickness spreads, if the tax collector arrives early, what then? These questions do not demand answers tonight. They simply demand attention. And yet there is tenderness here too. In the quiet, someone adjusts a blanket over a sleeping child. A hand reaches out, not for reassurance, but for familiarity, touching another presence in the dark. These small gestures matter more than temples or monuments. They are invisible to history, but essential to survival. Civilizations are often measured by what they build, but nights like this reveal what actually holds them together. Not stone, not ideology, but people trying very hard to endure without breaking. There is gentle humor woven into this endurance, though it is rarely expressed out loud. People joke softly about how the gods seem very interested in offerings, but strangely indifferent to back pain. They joke about how officials always arrive just when food runs low, as if summoned by hunger itself. This humor is quiet and dry, the kind that exists to keep despair from becoming too comfortable. Laughing too loudly would feel dangerous, as if it might attract attention from forces better left undisturbed. As the night stretches on, time feels different inside these homes. Without sunlight, hours lose their sharp edges. Past and future blur together, connected by the same anxieties. Parents remember their own childhood nights when they slept without fear, unaware of the calculations happening just beyond their dreams. Now they perform those calculations themselves, silently promising to shield the next generation for as long as possible. It is an unspoken agreement, renewed each night. Fragile, but sincere. Outside, the river continues its slow movement, indifferent to these intimate struggles. Inside, people negotiate with sleep, sometimes winning, sometimes not. This is where history becomes small enough to touch. Not in battles or decrees, but in the space between one breath and the next, between a thought and a prayer. The houses along the Nile may appear to be sleeping, but within them, minds remain awake, counting, worrying, hoping. In this quiet persistence, Egypt endures. Not grandly, but honestly, one restless night at a time. The things that do not sleep. Gods, crocodiles, and fear. Night along the Nile does not belong to humans. It merely tolerates them. When the lamps dim and doors are closed, another Egypt stretches and wakes, patient and alert. This is the hour claimed by creatures that do not fear darkness, by thoughts that grow sharper when vision fails, and by gods whose presence feels heavier after sunset. The day teaches people how to work and speak. The night teaches them how small they are. Along the riverbanks, shadows gather with purpose, and the silence feels intentional, as if something is waiting for permission that will never be granted. By daylight, the Nile can appear almost gentle. Boats drift, children splash near the edges, and fishermen argue loudly with the water as if it were a stubborn neighbor. The surface shines, reflecting the sky with an honesty that feels reassuring. At night, that same surface darkens into a moving absence. You cannot see where it ends or what passes beneath. The current sounds deeper, slower, as though the river is speaking a language meant only for itself. People who approach it after dark do so carefully, keeping distance, respecting an unspoken boundary, learned through stories and scars. Crocodiles understand this boundary perfectly. They are not creatures of chaos, but of patience, built for stillness and sudden decision. During the day, they hide, blending into mud and reeds, letting humans believe the river has been tamed. At night, they reclaim their confidence. Eyes rise just above the waterline, reflecting faint light with an unsettling calm. There is no anger in them, no malice, only hunger and instinct. This makes them far more terrifying. A crocodile does not hate you. It simply knows what you are made of. Snakes share this domain, slipping through darkness with quiet authority. They appear in fields, near homes, sometimes inside them. As if invited by heat and carelessness, people learn to move slowly at night, to place feet deliberately, to trust memory more than sight. Fear becomes practical, a tool rather than a weakness. Panic wastes energy. Caution keeps you alive. This wisdom is passed down without ceremony, absorbed through observation and loss. The night does not forgive mistakes, but it does reward respect. Hovering above all of this is Sobek, the crocodile god, watching with an expression that no one can quite interpret. He is worshipped along the Nile, honored with offerings and prayers, praised as a guardian of fertility and strength. Temples are built in his name, and priests speak of his protection with practiced confidence. At the same time, everyone knows to stay away from the water after dark. This contradiction does not trouble anyone. To the Egyptian mind, it makes perfect sense. A god can protect you and still eat you. Reverence does not imply safety. It implies recognition. There is dark humor in this relationship, though it is rarely acknowledged openly. People whisper jokes about how honoring Sobek is very important, preferably from a safe distance. They smile thinly when speaking of sacred crocodiles kept near temples, fed and admired, while wild ones are avoided with impressive discipline. To worship something does not mean you trust it. It means you accept its power and hope it notices your manners. In this way, religion becomes a negotiation rather than a comfort. The darkness itself feels alive, pressing in around the edges of vision. Without the sun, familiar shapes lose their certainty. A palm tree becomes a looming figure. A pile of nets looks like something breathing. The mind fills gaps eagerly, drawing on fear and memory to complete incomplete images. This is not imagination running wild, it is survival, responding to uncertainty. In the night, doubt is more dangerous than fear. Better to assume something is there than to assume nothing is. Stories circulate quietly during these hours, retold in fragments and warnings. Someone knew someone who went too close to the river and did not return. Someone heard a sound that did not belong to any animal they recognized. These stories are never fully detailed because detail invites questions and questions invite skepticism. Instead, they function as boundaries, reinforcing behavior through unease. The night becomes a teacher using discomfort as its lesson plan. Even the gods seem different after dark. By day they are carved, painted, defined. By night they feel abstract, less contained by stone and symbol. People sense them rather than see them, interpreting small coincidences as messages. A sudden noise becomes a sign. A dream becomes a warning. Faith grows sharper in uncertainty because clarity leaves little room for interpretation. In darkness, belief stretches to fill the unknown. Despite all of this, life continues. Someone must fetch water early, someone must guard animals, someone must stay awake. Courage exists here, but it is quiet and uncelebrated. It looks like familiarity with fear rather than victory over it. People do not conquer the night. They coexist with it, carefully, respectfully. They know it will always be stronger, and pretending otherwise would be foolish. As hours pass, the river keeps moving, carrying shadows and unseen lives toward the sea. Crocodiles sink and rise, snakes glide and vanish, gods remain silent. Humans wait for dawn, not with impatience, but with practiced endurance. The night has not harmed them this time, but it has reminded them of its terms. Along the Nile, nothing truly sleeps. Some things simply wait, and waiting here is its own kind of power. Fear in this place is not a sudden scream, but a steady presence, like the river itself, always nearby and never fully explained. Children learn it early, not through lectures, but through observation, watching how adults lower their voices at night and how certain paths are avoided without discussion. Fear becomes part of the landscape, as ordinary as mud brick walls and reed boats. It sharpens attention and slows movement, turning every action into a deliberate choice. In the darkness, confidence is replaced by awareness, and awareness becomes survival. It also shapes memory because nights that pass safely are remembered with relief, while nights that do not become lessons repeated for decades. The unsettling truth is that this fear is productive. It keeps people alive. It keeps them humble. It reminds them that mastery over nature is a story told during the day, while at night, nature listens and decides whether to tolerate the fiction a little longer. In this way, darkness performs a service, stripping away illusions of control and replacing them with awareness. It is uncomfortable, necessary, and deeply ancient. Long before empires or temples, night existed, and it will remain long after their names fade. Here, beside the Nile, fear is not weakness but wisdom, passed quietly from one careful generation to the next, without ceremony or apology. At night. Egypt. In 300 AD, when the gods begin to lose sleep. By the time night settles again over the Nile in the year 300 AD, Egypt is no longer alone with its ancient certainties. The land still looks the same in the dark. The river still moves with the same slow confidence. The stars still arrange themselves in familiar patterns above the palms and temples. But something unseen has shifted, something that does not flow like water or fade like daylight. Egypt now lives under Roman rule, wrapped inside an empire that speaks another language, worships power differently, and carries new ideas like quiet infections. The change is not sudden. It never is. It arrives softly, the way doubt always does, slipping into conversations, dreams, and prayers without announcing itself. Roman banners fly where pharaohs once ruled alone, and imperial officials now share space with local authorities. On the surface, life continues, much as it always has. Taxes are collected, fields are worked, festivals are observed. Rome is efficient at allowing traditions to survive as long as order remains intact. Yet beneath this apparent tolerance, something deeper is happening. A new belief is spreading, not through armies or decrees, but through words whispered and shared after dark. Christianity moves through Egypt like a shadow that does not belong to any object, quiet but persistent, unsettling precisely because it cannot be easily measured or controlled. The old temples still stand, their stone columns heavy with memory. Carvings of gods gaze outward, eternal and unmoving, as they have for centuries. By day, priests perform rituals as always, reciting hymns learned long before Rome existed. Offerings are made, incense burns, and sacred routines continue with disciplined confidence. But at night, those same temples feel different, emptier, larger. Their gods seem very still, perhaps too still. Faith, once solid as stone, now feels strangely porous, as if questions have begun to seep through the cracks. Christian communities gather quietly in homes, away from the grandeur of temples. There are no towering statues, no elaborate rituals, no ancient myths carved into walls. Instead, there are stories, spoken softly, about a single God who promises salvation rather than order. This God does not demand offerings of grain or animals. He demands belief. For people already tired of negotiating with floods, taxes, and unpredictable deities, this idea carries a dangerous kind of comfort. It simplifies the universe in a way that feels almost suspicious. One God, one truth, one path. It sounds too neat for a world shaped by the Nile. The coexistence of old and new beliefs creates an atmosphere thick with uncertainty. Priests of ancient gods continue their duties, aware that fewer people attend with the same unquestioning devotion. Christian teachers speak carefully, knowing that Rome's tolerance has limits. Ordinary people stand somewhere in between, listening, weighing, comparing. They are not philosophers by training, but survival makes everyone a philosopher eventually. Which God listens more closely? Which God protects better? Which God demands less when everything else already demands so much? There is a deep irony here that no one misses entirely. The ancient Egyptian gods have survived invasions, dynastic collapses, and countless reinterpretations. They have lived for thousands of years, woven tightly into the identity of the land itself. And now, suddenly, they face competition, not from another pantheon of equally complex deities, but from a single God who claims exclusivity. It is almost insulting in its simplicity. Gods who once governed the afterlife, the sun, the river, and the sky, now find themselves compared, measured, and questioned. Eternity, it turns out, does not guarantee job security. At night, these questions grow louder. People lie awake, replaying conversations they heard during the day. A neighbor mentioned a new teaching. A relative refused to attend a familiar ritual. Someone spoke of forgiveness instead of balance, salvation instead of judgment. These ideas do not replace old beliefs immediately. They coexist, overlap, and clash inside individual minds. A farmer might pray to the river gods for a good flood, then quietly wonder if the Christian God would offer something more reliable. Not necessarily better, just clearer. Monks begin to appear on the edges of society, retreating into the desert, seeking holiness through isolation. Their presence is unsettling in its own way. They reject comfort deliberately, turning away from family and community to pursue something invisible. To some they look insane, to others they look brave. The desert, long associated with danger and chaos, becomes a place of spiritual ambition. This reversal confuses traditional categories. If holiness can exist outside temples, what does that say about the temples themselves? The Roman authorities observe all of this with measured interest. They care less about theology and more about stability. A population arguing about gods is acceptable. A population united against Rome is not. Christianity's insistence on a higher authority than the emperor is quietly alarming. At the same time, persecuting believers risks turning them into martyrs, which history has shown to be remarkably ineffective. So Rome watches, calculates, waits. Meanwhile, Egypt absorbs the tension, as it always has, allowing contradictions to exist side by side. For ordinary people, this religious uncertainty adds another layer to an already heavy existence. They do not have the luxury of abstract debate. Faith must function. It must explain suffering, justify effort, and offer hope that feels tangible enough to matter. At night, when the river is dark and the future feels fragile, these needs sharpen. People ask themselves questions they would never voice aloud. If the old gods are truly eternal, why do they feel so distant lately? If the new God is all-powerful, why does the world still hurt so much? The gods, if they are listening, remain silent. The old ones stand frozen in stone. The new one speaks through texts and teachers, but not directly. This silence is perhaps the most unsettling part. In a culture accustomed to reading signs everywhere, divine quiet feels like abandonment, or worse, like judgment. Night becomes the time when belief feels least stable, when certainty dissolves into possibility, and possibility becomes fear. Yet even in this unease, life continues. People still attend festivals, still honor ancestors, still whisper new prayers when no one is watching. They hedge their bets, not out of cynicism, but out of practicality. When survival is uncertain, devotion becomes flexible. A prayer offered to multiple gods is not betrayal. It is insurance. History may judge this harshly later, but history does not have to feed children or survive floods. As darkness deepens, Egypt feels suspended between worlds. The ancient and the new exist in uneasy balance, neither fully dominant, neither fully defeated. The gods of old Egypt, once unchallenged, now seem restless, as if aware that belief is drifting elsewhere. The new god, powerful in promise, has not yet proven himself against the realities of Nile floods and Roman taxes. In this tension, faith becomes less about truth and more about endurance. The night holds these questions without resolving them. It wraps temples and houses alike in the same shadow, making no distinction between ancient stone and whispered scripture. People fall asleep eventually, not because they have answers, but because exhaustion outweighs doubt. Tomorrow they will work, pray, and choose again, often without realizing they are choosing at all. This is how belief changes, not through declarations, but through nights like this, when the old gods begin to lose sleep, and no one is entirely sure who will still be listening by morning. Dreams beside the river, when people speak with gods. As the night deepens and Egypt sinks further into stillness, something else begins to move. It does not walk the riverbanks like crocodiles, and it does not settle into temples like restless gods. It arrives quietly, slipping into minds once the body finally gives up its resistance. Dreams take over where daylight leaves off, and in Egypt around the year 300 AD, dreams are never dismissed as meaningless. To dream is not to escape reality. It is to enter another layer of it, thinner, stranger, and far more honest than waking life usually allows. The Egyptians have always believed that the night opens a door, not a dramatic gate with hinges and guards, but something subtler, like a veil pulled slightly aside. When the sun rules the sky, the world is solid, governed by rules and routines. When darkness arrives, those rules soften. The boundary between the living and the dead between humans and gods, between what is known and what is feared, becomes less secure. Dreams are the language spoken in this fragile space, a language that must be interpreted carefully, because misunderstanding it can be dangerous. People do not fall into sleep easily here. They ease into it as if approaching deep water. Thoughts drift first, then images, then scenes that feel familiar and unsettling at the same time. A farmer dreams of fields stretching endlessly, the grain tall and heavy, bending under a wind that does not exist. Another dreams of dry earth cracking open, swallowing seeds before they have a chance to grow. These are not abstract visions. They are direct translations of daily anxiety, replayed by the mind when it no longer needs to pretend everything is fine. The dead appear often in these dreams, and no one is surprised by this. Ancestors visit without warning, standing quietly, sometimes smiling, sometimes saying nothing at all. Their presence is not automatically frightening. In fact, it is often comforting. The dead are thought to have crossed into a realm of knowledge the living can only guess at. When they appear, people search their expressions for clues. Is this a warning? A blessing? Or simply a reminder that the path continues, whether one is ready or not? Not all dreams are gentle. Some arrive sharp and loud, filled with chaos and fear, floods that rise too high, snakes that strike without provocation, darkness that presses in until breathing feels impossible. These dreams linger after waking, clinging to the mind like damp cloth. People recount them carefully in the morning, choosing words that do not give the dream more power than it deserves. Interpretation is delicate work. To ignore a dream is risky. To believe it too fully is equally dangerous. Priests and dream interpreters occupy a strange position in society. They are consulted with seriousness, but also with a quiet skepticism. After all, dreams speak in symbols, and symbols can be bent. An interpreter who predicts disaster too often loses credibility. One who promises good fortune too easily invites disappointment. Still, people seek them out because uncertainty is heavier when carried alone. A shared interpretation feels lighter, even if it is no more accurate. There is, of course, humor in all of this, though it is rarely expressed directly. People know that not every dream carries divine weight. Sometimes a dream of abundance is simply the result of a full stomach. Sometimes nightmares follow an evening meal eaten too late. The line between the sacred and the ordinary blurs easily in sleep, and everyone understands this instinctively. The gods may speak through dreams, but digestion is equally persuasive. This awareness does not weaken belief. It grounds it. A dream must prove itself through repetition, intensity, or consequence before it is taken seriously. Along the Nile, the river itself often enters dreams, reshaped and exaggerated by the sleeping mind. It becomes wider, darker, more alive than it ever appears by day. Some dream of crossing it successfully, reaching the other side without harm. Others dream of falling in, pulled under by unseen forces. These images feel personal, but they also feel shared, as if the river is using many minds to tell variations of the same story. Survival depends on understanding the river while awake. Meaning depends on understanding it while asleep. Christian ideas add new layers to these nightly experiences. Dreams of a single God, of judgment or salvation, begin to circulate alongside older imagery. People dream of light where there should be darkness, of voices calling names they have never spoken aloud. These dreams confuse rather than comfort. They do not fit neatly into existing interpretations. Is this the same realm speaking with a new accent, or an entirely different door opening? No one agrees, and the dreams do not clarify. What remains constant is the belief that dreams matter because they bypass control. During the day, people manage appearances. They follow customs, speak appropriately, and suppress inconvenient thoughts. At night, the mind becomes honest. It reveals fears, desires, and doubts without permission. This honesty is what gives dreams their authority. Even if a dream is not a message from a god, it is certainly a message from the self, and that alone makes it worth attention. As night wears on, sleepers turn, murmur, and occasionally wake with a sharp intake of breath. Some sit up briefly, steadying themselves, reminding their bodies where they are. Others drift back into dreams without resistance, surrendering again to images they do not fully understand. Outside, the Nile continues its quiet movement, indifferent to human visions, yet deeply embedded in them. It is difficult to tell where the river ends and the dreaming mind begins. The hours before dawn are especially potent. Dreams become clearer, more coherent, as if something is rushing to speak before the door closes again. People wake during these hours with a sense of urgency, convinced that what they have seen cannot be ignored. They lie still, replaying scenes, memorizing details, afraid that movement will dissolve meaning. Memory becomes an act of devotion, holding on to fragments long enough to carry them into daylight. When morning finally approaches, dreams retreat reluctantly. They leave behind impressions rather than answers. People rise, stretch, and return to their routines, carrying invisible baggage shaped by the night. Some will adjust their behavior slightly, avoiding a decision, offering an extra prayer, delaying a journey. Others will dismiss their dreams entirely, claiming practicality, even as the images linger. Both responses coexist comfortably. Faith, like survival, allows for contradiction. In this way, dreams serve as bridges, not destinations. They connect the inner world to the outer one, the living to the dead, the known to the unknown. They do not resolve uncertainty. They deepen it, making it feel purposeful rather than chaotic. Along the Nile, in the quiet hours when the world seems suspended, dreams remind people that reality is layered, and that understanding often comes not through clarity, but through attention. As the sky lightens and the night loosens its grip, Egypt slowly wakes. The door between worlds closes again, unnoticed but felt. Dreams fade into memory, becoming stories, warnings, or private secrets. The gods retreat into silence. The river continues to flow, and people move forward into another day, shaped subtly by conversations they may or may not have had with something beyond themselves, beside the eternal listening water. Death is always present, but never in a hurry. In Egypt, death is not an interruption. It is a companion. It does not rush, it does not shout, and it does not need to surprise anyone to be effective. By the year 300 AD, people along the Nile have lived beside it for so long that it has lost its drama and gained something far more unsettling: familiarity. Death is woven quietly into daily routines, acknowledged without obsession, respected without panic. It waits patiently, like the river itself, confident that no one is truly leaving its reach. Life here is not lived in denial of death, but in conversation with it. From childhood, Egyptians learned that existence does not end, it transitions. This belief does not erase fear, but it reshapes it. The body is temporary, fragile, prone to illness and exhaustion. The soul, however, is expected to continue, to travel, to face judgment, and eventually to settle into a more permanent version of life. In this framework, dying is not failure, it is relocation. What matters is preparation. The living spend their days not only surviving, but rehearsing for what comes next, often without realizing how deeply this rehearsal shapes their choices. Mummification is the most visible expression of this preparation, and also the most misunderstood. It is not about preserving flesh for its own sake. It is about recognition. The soul must know its body. It must find its way back. Every layer of linen, every careful incision, every ritual word spoken over the corpse is an act of practical optimism. Someone, somewhere in the future, will need this body again. It should be ready. In a world where food supplies are uncertain and floods unpredictable, the level of care devoted to the dead is striking. There is something quietly ironic about it. People who struggle to control their daily lives exert extraordinary control over their remains. Funerary rituals are not moments of hysteria. They are orderly, deliberate, and often calm. Grief exists, but it is contained, guided by tradition. Death is sad, but it is not chaotic. The rituals provide structure at a moment when structure is desperately needed. They tell the living what to do next, how to behave, how to move forward. In this way, death reinforces order rather than disrupting it. It reminds everyone that there is a system, even if that system extends beyond the visible world. At night, however, this balance feels thinner. Darkness brings the living and the dead closer together, at least in the imagination. Shadows resemble figures too easily. A familiar sound feels like a memory returning. Dreams blur boundaries that daylight keeps neatly separated. The dead do not appear as monsters. They appear as they were, recognizable, calm, sometimes disappointed. Night strips death of its ceremonial distance and turns it into something intimate. This is when belief becomes personal rather than communal. Homes hold traces of those who are gone, an empty sleeping space, a tool no longer used, a name spoken less often but never forgotten. These absences are most noticeable at night, when activity slows and attention sharpens. People think about those who have already crossed over, wondering if they are comfortable, if they approve, if they still watch. The idea that the dead remain aware is both comforting and unsettling. It means no one is ever entirely alone. It also means privacy is a temporary illusion. There is a peculiar calm that comes from this constant proximity to death. It removes urgency. If life continues beyond the body, then mistakes are not final and suffering is not meaningless. At the same time, it places pressure on behavior. Actions echo. Choices matter beyond the present moment. Morality is not enforced solely by law or community, but by the expectation of future accountability. Judgment, after all, is not delivered by neighbors, but by something far more patient. This worldview produces a subtle, dry humor that surfaces occasionally, especially among those who have lived long enough to be tired. People joke quietly that they spend more time preparing for death than for breakfast, and there is truth in the joke. Meals are improvised. Burial arrangements are planned carefully. The afterlife is permanent. Hunger is temporary. Laughter here is not defiance. It is acknowledgement. When something is unavoidable, the only sensible response is to become comfortable enough to smile at it. Christian ideas complicate this relationship without replacing it. The promise of resurrection, judgment, and eternal salvation overlaps with existing beliefs in strange ways. Some find reassurance in the clarity of heaven and hell. Others find it troublingly simplistic. The Egyptian afterlife is complex, bureaucratic even, filled with tests, scales, and rules. Christianity offers a more direct path, but also a harsher division. At night, people compare these visions quietly, wondering which version of death feels more believable, more fair, or simply more familiar. Despite differing beliefs, one thing remains constant. Death is never portrayed as rushed. It arrives when it arrives. Illness may linger. Old age may stretch on quietly. Accidents happen, but even then they are absorbed into a larger narrative of inevitability. This patience changes how people live. There is less obsession with speed, less panic about time running out. Life is something to be endured, navigated, and eventually released. Urgency belongs to empires and rulers, not to existence itself. As the night deepens, the presence of death feels less threatening and more watchful. It stands nearby, not as an enemy, but as a reminder of proportion. The fears of the day shrink under its gaze. Taxes, arguments, disappointments, all feel smaller when measured against eternity. This does not remove pain, but it contextualizes it. Suffering becomes part of a longer story rather than a final verdict. When sleep comes, it is often accompanied by dreams of passage, doors opening, boats, crossing dark water, voices calling from a distance. These images do not always frighten. Sometimes they soothe, suggesting continuity rather than loss. The living drift closer to the dead in these moments, not through fear but through familiarity. Night becomes a shared space occupied by both memory and anticipation. By morning, death retreats politely into the background again. Work resumes. Children laugh. The river continues. Nothing dramatic has changed. And yet everyone carries the quiet awareness that life is temporary and preparation is ongoing. In Egypt, death is not a shock waiting to happen. It is a constant presence, patient, observant, and never in a hurry. The starry sky over the Nile, the only thing that never changes. After death has been contemplated and carefully set back into its familiar place, after dreams have thinned and fears have learned to sit quietly, the night above the Nile reveals something else entirely. The sky opens itself without effort, wide and indifferent, scattered with stars that do not care what year it is. In 300 AD, just as thousands of years before and thousands after, the heavens look the same to anyone who bothers to look up. This is the one element of Egypt that refuses to participate in change. Empires pass beneath it. Gods rise and fade beneath it. The sky remains unimpressed. For people living along the Nile, the stars are not decoration. They are reference points, guides, and silent witnesses. Long before written calendars, the sky taught Egyptians how to measure time. Certain stars signal floods, others mark seasons, and some are believed to house the souls of kings and ancestors. Even now, under Roman rule and religious uncertainty, the sky keeps its role without complaint. It does not argue theology. It does not adapt to new beliefs. It simply continues, consistent in a world increasingly unsure of itself. At night, when lamps are extinguished and conversations soften, people step outside and tilt their heads upward. The heat of the day has loosened its grip, and the cool air makes the act of standing still feel almost intentional. The stars stretch across the darkness like a map. No one fully understands, but everyone trusts. Orion still rises. Sirius still returns. The patterns remain faithful even when human promises do not. This reliability is deeply comforting, especially in a time when so many other certainties feel fragile. There is a quiet irony in how small humans feel under this sky, considering how grand their beliefs often are. Gods fight for attention below, temples compete with churches, and doctrines insist on absolute truth. Above it all, the stars say nothing. They shine equally over temples and huts, over priests and farmers, over believers and skeptics alike. The universe does not take sides. This realization humbles without humiliating. It does not crush faith, but it does place it gently into perspective. Astronomy and spirituality have always been closely linked in Egypt. The sky is not just observed, it is interpreted. Stars are associated with gods, with destiny, with order itself. To look upward is to look into the structure of existence, and yet there is no urgency in the stars. They do not hurry humans toward conclusions. They move slowly, predictably, teaching patience simply by existing. This patience contrasts sharply with human anxiety, making the sky feel wiser by default. At night, worries that felt enormous indoors begin to shrink. Under the stars, arguments lose their sharpness. Ambitions seem oddly temporary. Even fear softens because it feels out of place in something so vast. This does not mean problems disappear. Grain still needs to be counted. Illness still waits. Death still comes. But the scale changes. Life feels like a small story being told inside a much larger one, and that realization is strangely calming. There is also a subtle humor in humanity's relationship with the sky. People read meaning into stars that have burned long before any human belief existed. They assign personalities, intentions, and messages to distant lights that cannot possibly be aware of them. And yet this habit persists because meaning is something humans cannot resist creating. The stars do not object. They allow every interpretation without confirming any of them. In their silence, they tolerate human imagination generously. Christian thought introduces new interpretations of the heavens. The sky becomes the dwelling place of a singular God, a realm of ultimate judgment and eternal reward. This idea overlays older beliefs without erasing them completely. Some see the stars as angels, others as signs, others simply as lights. The sky absorbs these new stories effortlessly. It has room for all of them. If the gods below are restless, the heavens remain remarkably composed. The river reflects this sky imperfectly, breaking stars into fragments that tremble with the current. People sometimes watch this reflection instead of the sky itself, seeing the heavens distorted by water. It is a fitting image. Truth, like starlight on the Nile, is rarely seen directly. It is filtered through movement, perspective, and interpretation. The reflection is beautiful but unstable. Look too long and it changes. For those awake late into the night, the sky becomes a companion. It listens without responding. It offers presence without involvement. This is perhaps its greatest gift. In a world full of demands, the stars ask nothing. They do not require worship, explanation, or obedience. They simply are. This quality makes them strangely trustworthy. When everything else feels conditional, existence without expectation feels sacred. Children sometimes ask questions about the stars before sleep claims them. Adults answer gently, offering stories rather than certainty. No one claims full understanding, and no one expects it. The sky teaches acceptance of mystery in a way no sermon ever could. It demonstrates that not knowing is not the same as failing. Some things are meant to be observed, not solved. As the night reaches its deepest point, the stars feel closer, brighter, more numerous. The world below grows quieter, and the separation between earth and sky feels thinner. In these moments, Egypt feels ancient and small, exactly as it should. The land has endured countless transformations, and it will endure countless more. Above it all, the sky remains unchanged, patient, and unconcerned. When dawn approaches, the stars fade reluctantly, surrendering the stage back to the sun. They do not disappear, they simply retreat, waiting for the next night. People return indoors, carrying with them a faint sense of having witnessed something timeless. Nothing practical has been gained. No problems have been solved. And yet something has settled inside them. In a land defined by cycles, by floods and harvests, by belief and doubt, the starry sky offers a different kind of continuity. It reminds everyone that change is not universal. Some things persist, untouched by history's arguments. Empires rise and fall beneath the same constellations. Gods gain followers and lose them beneath the same silent lights. And along the Nile, generation after generation looks up, finding comfort, not in answers, but in constancy. Before dawn, when Old Egypt and New Egypt overlap, the night does not end suddenly. It loosens its grip slowly, almost reluctantly, as if unsure whether it should leave at all. Along the Nile, the hours before dawn feel stretched, suspended between what has been and what has not yet decided to arrive. The sky lightens just enough to suggest change without committing to it. Stars fade unevenly, some disappearing quickly, others lingering, as if refusing to give up their place. This is the hour when Egypt feels most uncertain, caught between versions of itself, standing quietly at the edge of transformation without any clear signal that transformation is happening. No one announces that a new era is approaching. Roosters crow, fires are stirred back to life, and people wake with the same stiffness and routines they carried yesterday. There is no sense of ceremony, no dramatic realization that something ancient is closing its eyes for the last time. History rarely provides that courtesy. Instead, it shifts quietly, letting habits continue while meanings change beneath them. People rise thinking about work, not epochs. They wash, eat, and step outside, unaware that they are participating in a transition future generations will argue about. The old Egypt is still everywhere. It lives in the language people speak, in the names they give their children, in the rhythms of work shaped by the river. It lives in the temples that still dominate the skyline, in the rituals repeated because they have always been repeated. The Nile continues to dictate the year, just as it always has. From a distance, nothing appears different enough to demand attention. Continuity is convincing. It reassures those who rely on it. And yet something else is present now, something quieter, but persistent. A new Egypt is forming, not through destruction, but through accumulation. New beliefs settle into old structures. New loyalties coexist with inherited ones. Roman administration overlays local customs, altering power without fully replacing it. Christianity spreads without erasing everything that came before, adapting to the landscape rather than reshaping it entirely. Change here does not look like replacement. It looks like layering. In the early light, this overlap is easiest to feel. A farmer might pause briefly, offering a prayer that blends old words with new ideas, not out of confusion, but convenience. A family might follow a Christian teaching while still honoring ancestors in familiar ways. No one feels the need to resolve these contradictions immediately. Life is complicated enough without insisting on purity of belief. Survival encourages flexibility. There is a gentle irony in how invisible these changes feel to those living through them. People imagine history as a sequence of bold moments, declarations, and turning points. In reality, it often happens while attention is elsewhere. Someone worries about a sick child, someone else calculates taxes, a neighbor argues over boundaries. Meanwhile, centuries-old traditions slowly lose their grip, not because they are rejected, but because they are no longer sufficient on their own. No one wakes up and announces that history has turned a page. Pages turn themselves quietly, while everyone is busy reading something else. The temples, once unquestioned centers of meaning, now feel slightly different in the morning light. They are still impressive, still respected, but no longer absolute. Their authority competes with other sources of truth, other promises. This does not make them irrelevant overnight. It makes them human. Institutions age, even when made of stone. The dawn reveals their endurance, but also their vulnerability. Christian gatherings, on the other hand, remain modest, often invisible to outsiders. There is no architectural dominance, no obvious claim to permanence. And yet there is momentum. Belief spreads through relationships, through shared hardship, through the appeal of certainty in uncertain times. This new Egypt does not look powerful yet, it looks patient. History has shown that patience is often more effective than force. As daylight strengthens, people return fully to their routines. Work resumes. The Nile is consulted again. Life reasserts itself. But beneath these familiar movements, subtle shifts continue. Words are chosen differently. Values are adjusted slightly. Priorities rearrange themselves without formal agreement. The old Egypt does not disappear. It simply stops being the only option. This in-between state is uncomfortable in ways people rarely articulate. It creates a sense of instability without clear cause. Things feel familiar but not entirely secure. Traditions still function, but not with the same unquestioned authority. New ideas offer hope, but also demand commitment. Choice becomes unavoidable, even when people would prefer habit. Dawn brings light, but it also brings visibility, and visibility reveals change. There is hope here, though it is cautious. The possibility of renewal exists alongside the fear of loss. A new Egypt might offer different answers, different forms of belonging. It might also demand the letting go of identities that have defined people for generations. Hope and grief arrive together, inseparable, each giving meaning to the other. This is not the triumphant hope of conquest or revolution. It is quieter, more fragile, built on adaptation rather than victory. As the sun finally rises above the horizon, Egypt looks much as it did yesterday. The river glows, fields wait, and voices carry across the water. Nothing announces the significance of this moment, and yet it matters. The overlap continues. The old Egypt and the new Egypt share the same morning, the same labor, the same uncertainties. One does not end so that the other can begin. They coexist, influencing one another, negotiating space. This is how eras truly change. Not with endings, but with mornings. With people waking up and doing what they have always done, slightly differently, for reasons they may not fully understand. By the time anyone notices that the balance has shifted, it will already be normal, and the Nile will still be there, watching another version of Egypt learn how to breathe under a new sky. The Nile still flows, and people pass through. In the end, everything returns to the river, not because the Nile demands attention, but because it never leaves. Long after the night has thinned into morning, long after arguments about gods, empires, and meaning have quieted, the water continues its steady movement from south to north. It flows now as it did in the year 300 AD, and as it did thousands of years before that moment ever received a name. The river does not mark time, it dissolves it. Standing beside it, one begins to understand how small a human lifetime really is, and how patient the world can afford to be. The people who lived along these banks in that distant year are gone. Their names, spoken once with urgency and affection, have faded into dust and speculation. Their worries, so immediate and heavy at night, resolved themselves in ways that no longer matter. The farmer counting grain, the mother listening to a child breathe, the priest wondering whether his God was still listening, the believer quietly choosing a new faith. All of them passed through their moments and then moved on, carried away by time, as gently and decisively as the river carries silt. They did not know they would disappear. They simply lived. What remains is not their certainty, but their setting. The river bends where it always has. The wind still moves through reeds with the same sound it made when Roman officials still collected taxes and temples still commanded unquestioned loyalty. Night still arrives without asking permission. Darkness still changes the shape of familiar things. If you stood here now, listening carefully, you would hear nothing that would surprise them. The environment has outlasted its inhabitants with quiet confidence. There is something unsettling about this continuity. Humans like to believe they leave marks, that their struggles and beliefs reshape the world in visible ways. Sometimes they do. Often they do not. The Nile absorbs generations without comment. It does not mourn. It does not celebrate. It carries traces of everyone, briefly, before redistributing them elsewhere. This is not cruelty. It is scale. The river simply operates on a timeline that does not align with human importance. At night, this truth feels closer. Without the distractions of daylight, the mind drifts toward uncomfortable realizations. All those nights of fear, faith, doubt, and preparation belong to people who are now indistinguishable from one another. Their gods argued, replaced each other, redefined meaning. The river watched without reacting. The stars witnessed without intervening. And still, people lived as if their moment mattered completely, because to them it did. This is not a mistake. It is necessity. To live without believing in the significance of one's own life would be unbearable. The irony is gentle but unavoidable. Each generation believes itself to be standing at the center of something important, and each generation is both right and wrong. Right because their experiences are real and immediate. Wrong because the world does not pause for them. The Nile proves this simply by continuing. Even now, long after the people of 300 AD have vanished, the river carries echoes of their choices. not as memories but as consequences layered into the present. Fields still follow patterns shaped centuries ago. Beliefs still carry traces of older arguments. Languages retain shadows of forgotten tongues. Continuity does not mean stagnation. It means accumulation. The past does not disappear. It dissolves into what comes next. There is a quiet humor in imagining those ancient Egyptians believing, as people always do, that their concerns were uniquely urgent. They worried about floods, taxes, illness, and faith, convinced that these pressures defined their time. And they were right, just as every generation is right. What they could not see was how familiar their worries would feel to anyone standing here later, facing different names and symbols, but the same underlying uncertainty. The details change. The structure remains. Night returns again, as it always does. The same darkness settles over the same river, and the same sounds rise from the water and the land. Somewhere, someone stands quietly, looking out, perhaps thinking about their own life, their own future, their own fears. They may believe they are alone in these thoughts. They are not. They are repeating a posture perfected over thousands of years. A human standing beside something older, trying to understand their place within it. The Nile does not offer answers. It never has. What it offers is presence. It reminds anyone who watches it long enough that permanence belongs to processes, not to people. Civilizations, religions, identities all pass through, shaped briefly by the river and then released. This does not make them meaningless, it makes them temporary. And temporary things can still matter deeply. As the water moves, it reflects fragments of light, breaking them apart and carrying them forward. This reflection is never stable. It shifts constantly, depending on wind, current, and angle. Truth behaves much the same way. What seemed solid at one moment becomes distorted at another. People adapt, reinterpret, and continue, often without realizing how much has changed. The river accepts all of this without resistance. In the quiet, there is a final, unsettling thought that lingers longer than the rest. The people of 300 AD are gone, but they once stood exactly where you might stand now. They listened to the same water, felt the same night air, and believed their lives were happening at the most important moment imaginable. They were not wrong, and neither are you. If you stood by the Nile tonight, watching the darkness settle and the river move as it always has, you might feel something familiar stirring beneath your own thoughts, a sense of smallness, a sense of connection, a quiet awareness that life is brief, layered, and deeply ordinary. And in that moment, you would not be so different from them at all.